Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. It was Halloween night. I was working the overnight shift at a gas station. I'd been working there for about 6 months. The hours were quiet, especially after midnight. I wasn't expecting much action, just the usual routine. The night started off normal enough. There was a chill in the air, and the streets were empty. Most people were either at parties or home with their kids, trick-or-treating. I was behind the counter, restocking some snacks, when I heard something outside, a faint jingle. At first, I thought it was a car's radio or maybe just the wind, but when I stopped and listened, I realized it was coming from an ice cream truck. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. It seemed kind of late for an ice cream truck to be out here, especially on a Halloween night. The sound wasn't the usual cheerful tune you'd hear in the summer either. It was slower, almost a little eerie. I stepped over to the window and looked out, but the truck was already past the station. It was a faded white truck, and I couldn't make out much more. It didn't stop at the gas station, just continued down the street and out of sight. I shrugged and went back to my work, trying to shake off the weirdness. Maybe 30 minutes later, I heard it again, the jingle. But this time it was closer. I walked over to the window, half expecting to see the same truck again. Sure enough, it was back, but this time it didn't pass by. It had stopped across the street near an old, abandoned building. The engine was off, and the truck just sat there. It felt off. There was something strange about it, like the truck had no business being there at all. I stared at it for a minute, trying to figure out what the deal was, but there was no one inside. No movement at all. No lights, no sound. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't help but keep checking out the window. There was something unnerving about how quiet everything had gotten. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a tap. It was coming from the side window, by the register. I froze. It was soft but distinct. I slowly turned to the window, and that's when I saw him. A man was standing there in front of the glass. He was dressed in a clown costume, but it wasn't some silly, colorful outfit. This one looked worn out, almost dirty. His face was painted white, with bright red lips that made him look kind of unsettling. He wasn't saying anything. He just stood there, staring at me through the glass. His eyes were wide and fixed on mine. In one hand, he held a long knife, and he was dragging the tip of it along the glass in a slow, steady rhythm. I felt my heart rate pick up. I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't scared yet, but there was definitely a feeling of unease creeping up on me. I tried to ask him, "What do you want?" He didn't answer. He just kept smiling that weird grin and tapping the blade. I could feel myself getting more nervous. I reached for the phone, dialed 911, and told the dispatcher what was happening, though I don't think I sounded as calm as I wanted to. The dispatcher said help was on the way, but the whole time, I couldn't take my eyes off the clown. He hadn't moved an inch. He was still there, staring at me. I felt like time was stretching out. Eventually, he stepped back. Just like that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows near the truck. I didn't waste any time. I locked the door and shut all the windows. I stayed behind the counter, trying to steady my breath. I didn't know if he was coming back or not, but I wasn't about to take any chances. When the cops finally showed up, I unlocked the door. They took a quick look around, but the ice cream truck was gone. There wasn't a trace of anyone. They asked a few questions, took my report, but said they didn't find anything. The whole thing felt weird. I never did find out who that guy was or what he was doing there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just out there for fun. It was around 4:20 a.m. I'd just gotten back from a night of partying for Halloween, catching an Uber because there was no way I was driving in my condition. I wasn't completely smashed, but I was definitely past tipsy, my head pounding with a relentless headache by the time I reached my front door. I fumbled with my keys for what felt like an eternity before finally managing to unlock the door and stumble inside. Everything I'd brought with me, coat, bag, the remnants of a night out, got tossed onto the floor. I swallowed some medicine, hoping it would ease the pounding in my skull, and then collapsed onto the couch. Exhaustion should have taken over, but the headache wouldn't let me sleep. I just lay there with my eyes shut, kind of floating between being awake and knocked out. Time blurred. I couldn't tell if minutes or hours passed. Then someone started ringing the doorbell several times. I didn't get up to answer. I just wanted to sleep and be left alone. Obviously, with it being the middle of the night, someone ringing my doorbell repeatedly should be concerning, but like I said, I'd had a bit too much to drink. Eventually, the ringing stopped, and I finally drifted into sleep. When I woke, I felt weak and groggy, my head still thundering. The house was dark and eerily silent. I pushed myself off the couch and shuffled toward the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I noticed a streak of light slicing across the hallway wall. My blurry, hungover brain immediately registered it as moonlight, except it was spilling in through the front door, which wasn't closed. A flicker of panic shot through me. Had I really left the door open? I didn't remember doing that. Before I could move to check, I heard it. Footsteps upstairs. I froze, my mind racing, and instinctively dropped behind the couch. There were two sets of footsteps pacing the floor directly above me. I considered making a run for it, but hesitation paralyzed me. By the time I thought about moving, the chance had slipped away. As the footsteps began coming down the stairs, there was a pause. Then I heard the front door click shut. The streak of moonlight vanished.
"All right, let's get on with it,"
a man's voice said. I was wide awake now, sober, alert, every nerve in my body on fire. They'd probably slipped in moments before I woke, checked the bedrooms upstairs, and, finding no one, assumed the house was empty. My chest burned with adrenaline, my heart hammering in my ears. I could hear them moving around the house, talking, casual, normal conversation like they weren't even committing a crime. That was terrifying. If they were comfortable enough to chat about the weather or whatever while robbing a stranger's home, what might happen if they actually caught me? I listened as they went through every room, opening drawers and rifling through boxes. My couch, arranged diagonally in the corner of the living room, gave me a bit of cover, but it wasn't much. If they got too close, I would have been completely exposed. One of them moved closer, and I froze, barely breathing, hoping he'd turn or step away. Instead, his gaze passed just above me as he looked down at the cushions. Then they moved on, leaving me behind in tense silence. I stayed completely still for almost half an hour, my ears straining with every sound, footsteps, drawers sliding open, muttered words, until finally they left. No warnings, no threats, nothing about returning. I waited a few moments before slowly emerging from behind the couch, grabbing my phone and calling the police. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a burglary. I'd left the door unlocked, but a neighbor said they'd seen two men watching my house suspiciously over the course of the past week. They likely noticed I lived alone and that my car was usually parked in the driveway. So when I took my car to the Halloween's party and came back in an Uber, they assumed I wasn't home. Thankfully, it seems they only intended to steal. But if they'd found me hiding on the couch, I can't even imagine what might have happened. This happened around Halloween of last year. It had just started getting cold again. I was 19 at the time, still living with my older sister in a rental house a little outside of town. We'd been living there for about a year. She's 6 years older than me and had taken me in when things at home got bad. It wasn't a huge place. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small front yard, and a backyard that we never really used. So, we were on the edge of a residential neighborhood. Not super quiet, but not busy either. You'd hear the occasional car go by or kids playing down the street. Anyway, it was right around Halloween when my sister told me she was heading to Florida with her boyfriend for a week. I think they were doing some kind of last-minute trip to escape the cold. She'd been complaining about the weather turning. I didn't think much of it. I had a few shifts at work lined up, and honestly, I liked having the place to myself. I'm not the type who goes out to parties or anything, even on Halloween. A quiet house, some takeout, a couple horror movies, that was enough for me. She left on the morning of October 30th, just as the wind started to get that sharp bite in it. Later that same afternoon, around 2 o'clock, I heard a knock at the door. I assumed it was a delivery for my sister, so I went to answer it. But instead of a package, I found a man, probably in his early 40s, standing there empty-handed. "Hi, can I help you?" I asked. He held my gaze for an uncomfortably long moment before finally replying, "Oh, I just wanted to see who lives here. Sorry, didn't mean to bother you." With a smile and a nod, he turned and walked off. The whole interaction struck me as odd. I wasn't sure what he was getting at, but I shrugged it off, shut the door, and went on with my evening. Nothing else unusual happened that night. The next day, I had work. I left early in the morning and didn't get back until around 6. Not long after I started making dinner, there was another knock at the door. This time, I checked through the peephole first. It was the same man from the day before, easy to recognize since he was wearing the exact same clothes. I opened the door cautiously, only cracking it a little. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He smiled. "Of course," he said lightly, then added, "Just checking in on you." The way he said it made it seem like he thought he belonged there, as if I should have been expecting him. "Are you a neighbor of mine?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he was just one of those overly curious locals. But he shook his head. "Oh no, I was just walking around." He was really starting to creep me out, so I told him I was fine and closed the door. I waited until I was sure he had left the porch before going back to my dinner. Later that night, I messaged my sister to ask if she had ever seen him before, but she hadn't. I felt uneasy the rest of the night. Even with all the doors locked and the lights on, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The thought of that man lingered in my mind. What reason could he possibly have for showing up if it wasn't something unsettling? The night passed without incident, and the following day was just as quiet. No knocks, no strange sounds. For a moment, I started to think maybe it was all in my head, and there really wasn't anything to worry about. The day after, I had time off work. It was also the last day before my sister would be back. I spent most of it indoors, reading, watching YouTube, and trying to relax. Every now and then, I'd peek through the blinds just to be cautious, but nothing seemed out of place. Then, around 8 in the evening, while I was watching TV, I heard a scraping sound outside, like something being dragged across the siding. My heart jumped as I rushed to the window and pulled back the blinds. The bush right beneath the glass was shaking, and in the silence, I caught the faint sound of footsteps running away. I couldn't see much in the dark, but my stomach dropped. It had to be the same man. The thought ran through my head. How long had he been there? Was he hiding in those bushes, trying to watch me? Shaken, I grabbed my phone and called my sister. Thankfully, she answered. I tried to explain what was happening, but I was speaking so quickly she could barely keep up. In the middle of my panicked explanation, a knock sounded at the door. I froze. I didn't answer. The man's voice followed, calling out as he knocked harder. He begged me to let him in, saying he was hurt. Then he shifted, making excuses, apologizing, insisting he hadn't meant anything by it. His knocking grew louder, more frantic, almost desperate. It was disturbing, like something was seriously wrong with him. My sister told me firmly to call 911. I hung up and dialed immediately. For another 5 minutes, the man stayed at the door, pounding and pleading for me to open up. Finally, he gave up and left. To this day, I don't know what he truly wanted. I don't know how long he might have been watching me, or if he had figured out that my sister was gone. The timing felt like too much of a coincidence. Whatever the case, I haven't seen him since, and I hope I never do. It was Halloween night, and everything was calm in my neighborhood. Too calm, actually. I live in a pretty quiet part of California, one of those places where nothing much ever happens. Most people had already gone inside, and the last few trick-or-treaters were heading home with their candy bags. I was sitting on the couch, the glow of my TV, the only light in the house, but for some reason, I just couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the Halloween vibe, or maybe I just had too much sugar from the candy. Either way, I decided to head out for a walk. It was around 11 p.m. The streets were almost empty now, with just a few houses still lit up with Halloween lights and decorations. The air was cool, the kind of crisp night where you can smell the pumpkins and candle wax lingering in the air. Everything looked peaceful. I figured I'd walk around the block to check out the Halloween decorations, maybe see if anyone had set up something cool. At first, it was fine. I walked past houses with cobwebs and jack-o'-lanterns, and some people had gone all out with their yard setups. But then, as I kept walking, I noticed something. There was a guy standing a few houses down. He wasn't moving, just standing there in the dark, kind of out of place. I could barely make out the details, but he was wearing one of those cheap plastic masks you see in every costume store. The kind where it's just a blank face, no expression or anything. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe he was just standing there waiting for his friends or something. I figured it was just a Halloween thing. People are always out in costumes at weird hours. But then I started walking again, and I noticed something strange. The guy wasn't just standing there anymore. He was following me. It wasn't like he was charging after me or anything. It was more like he was pacing behind me, matching my steps. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe I was just paranoid, but every time I looked over my shoulder, he was still there, still moving at the same pace. I kept walking, a little faster now, but he kept pace. A few steps behind, but always there. My stomach started turning. It's hard to explain, but something about it just didn't feel right. Now I'm trying to stay calm, but I'm not exactly thrilled at the idea of some guy in a mask stalking me at 11 p.m. on Halloween. I thought maybe he was just out for a late-night walk, too. But the more I walked, the more I noticed he was following me block by block. Every time I sped up, he sped up. At one point, I turned a corner, and he was still there, just far enough back where I couldn't see his face, but close enough to make me uncomfortable. I started walking faster, way faster. And then, just when I thought I was about to make it to a house that was still lit up, he did something that made my heart skip a beat. He started running. I didn't stop to think, I just bolted. I ran as fast as I could toward the nearest house. I didn't care if I knew the people or not. I just needed to get to a porch, get to some kind of safety. I reached the door, pounding on it as hard as I could. My hands were shaking. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I couldn't hear him anymore, but I knew he was still back there. Finally, the door opened. I didn't even wait for them to say anything. I just told them, "Someone's following me." I was out of breath, still shaken, and I didn't know how else to explain it. The person looked at me for a second, then quickly stepped aside to let me in. Without a word, they locked the door behind me and grabbed their phone to call the police. "Stay here," they said calmly. "I'm calling the cops." It didn't take long for the cops to show up. I heard the sirens and I could see the lights flashing outside. I didn't waste any time telling them what had happened, and they immediately went to check the street. I stayed inside, still shaking. The officer kept me up as they searched the block. It felt like forever, but then I saw them catch someone a few houses down. The guy had a trick or treat bag with him. I figured they'd find candy, maybe some chocolate bars or something, but when they opened it, my stomach dropped. Inside the bag were lockpicks, duct tape, and a knife wrapped in cloth. I froze. He'd been following me for a reason, and I had no idea what his plan was, but I knew it wasn't good. I didn't stay outside long enough to find out much more. They arrested him right there, and I just stood by the door, watching. I kept thinking about how close he was, how I could have been an easy target if I hadn't gotten to that house in time. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.